Everyone. While we wait for people to join, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and tell us where you are dialing in from today. For those who have just joined us, we're waiting for a few more people to join. In the meantime, please feel free to share in the Zoom chat where you're dialing in from and introduce yourselves as well. Awesome. I think we will get started. Bulavinaka, Talofa, Maloilele, Kiorana, hello and welcome everyone. On behalf of Water for Women, the Australian Water Partnership, the University of Technology Sydney's Institute for Sustainable Futures, and Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, I would like to welcome you to today's session on the theme, Women at the Forefront, Valuing Diverse Voices, Leadership and Action on SDG6. Thank you all for joining us today, including those who are attending the United Nations Global Water Conference in New York. I am Grace Tundreo, based in Suva, Fiji, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for this important session on World Water Day. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands on which we work, live and learn, and pay my respects to them and their cultures, and to elders past, present, and emerging. I would also like to extend my respects to all First Nations and Indigenous people of the lands on which you are dialing in from today. In this session, I look forward to taking you on a journey that highlights specific voices and experiences in advocating for water and WASH, and why women's leadership is so critical for inclusive, climate resilient water and WASH in their communities. But before we dive in, a few housekeeping matters for today. Firstly, to ensure greater accessibility to this session, we have enabled Zoom's live transcript or closed capture functionality, and you can access this using the CC button in the menu tab. To avoid any background noise, a kind reminder to our audience to please keep yourselves on mute and turn off your video during the presentations. We recommend the speaker view for now and gallery view for the open forum. You can change this at the top right of your Zoom screen. Now for our open forum a bit later on, we look forward to hearing your questions. So please do add these into the chat box as we go, and we will return to them once we commence the forum. Lastly, towards the end of this session, we will also run a Menti poll. So sometime during the session, you might like to pull up another window in your browser and type in www.menti.com. We will provide the code later on in the session. I now have the pleasure to pass on to Dr. Alison Baker, who is the Water for Women Fund Manager, and she's joining us all the way from New York ahead of the UN Water Conference. She will be sharing the opening remarks for our session today. Over to you, Alison.
Great, thank you, Grace, and hello everybody, and a happy World Water Day. So as Grace has said, my name is Alison Baker, and I'm the fund manager for the Water for Women Fund. And as she also said, joining you from New York, where the UN 2023 Global Water Conference is about to officially begin tomorrow, World Water Day in North America. But now we get to celebrate it here first with this webinar. And as I often say, as usual, the Pacific is often the head of the game. So I welcome you all here today on behalf of the Australian Water Partners for Development to acknowledge and celebrate not only World Water Day 2023, but also International Women's Day that we did actually celebrate earlier this month. And we're delighted to have so many people participating on this online session, and I can see people sort of still joining and feel very privileged to be able to provide a few opening remarks. With this year's theme for World Water Day being about accelerating change to solve the water and sanitation challenges that many communities face around the world, this discussion is not only timely, but it's critical. And while there are many committed to accelerating change, joining all the discussions here in New York, there's many of those kind of people right around the globe. So we can all make a difference regardless of where we are or who we are. So achieving clean water and sanitation for all, as I sort of outlined in SDG6, is so critical for health, well-being and resilience in every individual, community and society as a whole. How can people work, eat, live safely without access to clean water and sanitation? It just very much goes to the heart of resilience in terms of community, but also in terms of climate. Climate change is well and truly with us now, with escalating risks and exacerbating impacts. Inclusive water and wash is such a critical connector for community resilience and the ability to adapt and respond to increasing climate hazards. But we also now better understand that how climate impacts are not experienced equally. By everyone in the community. We also know that we need to work harder at valuing the voices, knowledge and capacities of women, Indigenous peoples, and people from a whole range of marginalized communities. They're so critical for shaping locally led sustainable solutions, for ensuring equitable access to clean water and sanitation for everyone, and working towards that climate resilient future. Enabling those diverse perspectives at the decision-making table strengthens the prospects that we can get more holistic and sustainable solutions to climate, water, and wash-related issues at all levels, whether that be global or local. But to do this, we need to really proactively hear and amplify the voices of everyone, including Indigenous people, women, people with disabilities, as an examples of many of those voices that we want to hear from and need to hear from. But nowhere is this more important than in the Pacific, whose peoples are at the forefront of those devastating climate change impacts, but they're also the people that are at the forefront of driving that locally led solutions for that very positive change. Water for Women and the Australia Water Partnerships has embedded a really strong gender and social inclusion approach across all its partnerships and projects in our region. And we'll hear from a couple of those today. So now I'm excited to hear from some of these diverse voices from the Pacific and Australia so they can share their incredible work, highlight some of the challenges and inspire that positive change for climate resilience that we all know we need to find. So together, let's get back and working together at water and sanitation so that everyone can have that. We need to get that all back on track. To do that, sort of accelerating positive social norms that support gender equality, but also build equitable systems so we can really make that lasting contribution so everyone can have a climate resilient future. I now warmly invite you to all listen to our esteemed colleagues from both the Pacific and Indigenous Australia. Join in the discussion, both within this session and I'm sure those future conversations and dialogue that we're going to have together. So I'd now like to hand back to Grace, your moderator for the session. Thank you and enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you, Alison, for setting the scene for us. Audience, as Alison has mentioned, you will now be hearing from 5 different leaders from different contexts in the Pacific and Indigenous Australia, who will all share a common thread. These people advocate for better access to water and sanitation for the communities that they serve, and recognize that gender equality and social inclusion are central for making this happen. You will hear from these speakers and their interviewers in the format of a Yumi Stori. There is no exact English translation which can do justice to this enriching concept from Papua New Guinea, but I will have a go as I believe it is similar to our Talanoa here in Fiji. Yumi Stori is an invitation for people to come together and share stories, experiences, and perspectives on topics that interest them. Ultimately, it is a reflective discussion between people. Now, given the accessibility and internet challenges, we decided to pre-record these Yumi stories, and we will be joined live by those speakers who can make it for the open forum later on. A note that some Yumi stories had to be pulled together from both video and audio files due to challenges with internet connection in rural and remote locations. This is a kind reminder of one of the many challenges faced when trying to highlight the voices of the Pacific, but we will not let this stop us. So with that said, for the first Yumi story, I have the great honor of introducing the Honorable Cassie Sawang, who is the recently elected Member of Parliament for Rai Coast in Papua New Guinea and the Vice Minister for Trade and Industry. Cassie was going to be joined by Navara Kiene, the Country Director for Programs of Water Aid in Papua New Guinea, for the sharing of her story. However, due to internet challenges and a very busy schedule, Cassie has kindly recorded herself directly and shares her message. Navara will be joining us live for the open forum later on. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now hear from the Honorable Cassie Sawang.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to join you on the World Water Day virtual event. I thank you, Water for Women and Australia Water Partnership for this opportunity. My name is Cassie Sawang. I am a Member of Parliament in Papua New Guinea's 11th Parliament. I'm actually one of the 2 women in Parliament, and I thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to have my voice. Before I became a parliamentarian, I used to build water supply in remote rural communities, and that's how I mobilized the people to actually address one of the key issues that affects us, and that is access to clean and safe water and proper sanitation. As you know, Papua New Guinea is one of the countries in the world that we have a very low rate of people having access to clean and safe water and sanitation. And I want to talk a bit about the opportunities that exist in these challenges. And one of them is that you know, our government about a decade ago has set a national target that by 2030, 70% of Papua New Guineans must have access to clean, safe water and sanitation. So since the policy was released on wash water, sanitation and hygiene in 2015, there's been some progress made, and one of them is for the government, the NEC, to decide on establishing the National Wash Authority. That decision was made in 2018, and it has yet to be implemented. And that is something I, as a parliamentarian and advocate for having women access to water and decision making, will be taking up with the government now to actually look at establishing the authority and having it funded. So the government have that opportunity to actually do something drastic, take some affirmative action on the issue of water, is through institutionalizing the wash authority and having an organization that focuses on wash alone and looking at the entire country and see which areas we need to put in more efforts. And another opportunity also exists that districts, we have 96 districts who can work with the wash authority once it's established. So we can address the wash issue in all of our districts, and we can address it one district at a time, one ward and one community at a time. We also have opportunities in resources. We have a lot of water resources, but most of our people, they rely on the flowing, running water, and we want to move away from that to clean and safe water. And I am very happy that my people have elected me to parliament. And water, the wash is one of the issues that I will be actually speaking on. So look at the districts. Every district gets 10 million kina. The other question I was asked to actually comment on is, women in decision making, and I would want to suggest that, to address WASH issue, we need to bring that down to the local ward community level. So if we have a community that builds around, let's say, the ward development committee, using the government structure, of course, of councillors, then within the WDC, the Ward Development Committee, there's a women's rep, and we could have committees for different issues, and one of them can be for WASH. And when we involve women in decision making at the lower level, the decisions are respected, the actions are respected. That is where when men will trust us women to take on leadership, starting from the bottom up. So I'll give an example of a village in my district. The women used to market their garden produce and make money to contribute towards a water supply. After many years, they contributed some funds, and the Lutheran Church actually helped them to fund a water supply. Following that, the men were really amazed, and they trusted in the women's leadership because the women actually did something. So in terms of getting more women into decision making, in terms of WASH, I suggest we work through our districts and our different wards under the ward structure, and even the church structure, because the churches actually respect women in their respective leadership in the church. So I suggest we work at the lower level and up, while other resources will be from top down. Even education is very important in order for us to address this issue, because when we get more girls educated and they occupy high positions in government, in business, they will be able to actually make decisions, especially in terms of funding and policy decisions that will accelerate our efforts to address the issue of WASH in SDG6. So you can see that we can identify with the struggle of WASH, the struggles women and girls face. So we need more women in leadership. Like I said, we need to institutionalize the issue of WASH in Papua New Guinea. And that means we need to actually have the National Water and Sanitation Hygiene Authority up and running. So we have an organization that actually gets annual budgetary funding to address WASH in PNG. And in terms of implementation, the WASH will actually partner with other development partners, as well as the district development authorities and the wards, to actually have the efforts from the community level up, while the resources and the policies flow from top down for us to address the issues. Issues like WASH, you need the lived experiences. I can talk passionately about WASH because that's where I came from. I grew up in a rural Papua New Guinean village, and as I was growing up, I carried water every day. And now when I go back, I don't want the ladies and women to repeat the same things. So when I'm talking about policy change, allocation of resources, and institutionalizing our efforts, I am actually passionate about it. I'm talking from my lived experiences. But when we have, like in PNG, more men than women, we can't have that collective voice becoming stronger, because men in PNG, they don't have the lived experience of carrying water every day. So that makes it very important that we need to have more women in decision making, more women in parliament, because we can talk and we can take action based on our lived experiences. And I want to say thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to have a little bit of say on the issue of WASH in Papua New Guinea.
Wow. Thank you to the Honorable Cassie Sawang for sharing a powerful perspective. And, in the video she shared her lived experience as a woman that drives her passion for accelerating positive change in Papua New Guinea. On to the next one. I now have the great pleasure in introducing Nolene Nambulivo. She is the Executive Director of Diverse Voices and Action, also known as Diva for Equality, which is a women's rights organization based in Fiji. Nolene will be joined by Tema Wickham, who is the WASH Manager for Plan International in the Solomon Islands, for the sharing of a story.
Thank you so much, Noeline, for your time. We'll just start off with the first question. So tell me a bit about the work of DIVA and how you came to be the Executive Director for DIVA for Equality.
DIVA for Equality, or Diverse Voices in Action for Equality, is actually a lesbian, bisexual, and trans and queer people-led group from the Pacific, and that's quite an unusual set of work, I would say. And how we started was there was a lot of quite violent homophobic and transphobic reaction to many young people at the time that we started in 2011. And so we had a group of young people who came to my partner and I and said, please, can you help us? Now, we've gone from those early, sets to 5 work streams that really cut across all kinds of issues. So they include universal human rights and sexual rights, and they include bodily autonomy and integrity, universal human rights. And then the second work stream is really trying to connect social, economic, ecological, and climate justice, because we know that a person has, so many facets to ourselves. And we said from the very beginning that we really don't want to just talk to people about one aspect of who we are as women and who we are as human beings. And then the third set of work is around support and accompaniment for those who are doing this work, activists and advocates, because we found that there's a lot of trauma also, and a need for support for each other who are in social movements, not just feminist social movements, but across all of us who are doing work on for development justice and human rights. And then the fourth set of work that we do is really urgent action. And that's about human rights violations, yes, but more and more it's about ecological and climate justice. So the loss and damage that so many of us are already facing across the world. And we were just seeing so many things around cyclones and floods and housing and water and sanitation that are everyday challenges and needs for women in our community. And seeing that and knowing that 99% of our community is experiencing poverty, we really needed to make sure that we're working on these issues together. So that's really who DIVA is.
So as a female leader who has advocated for the realization of rights for women, girls, and gender diverse people, what do you see as the critical issues for them in water and WASH?
There actually a lot. So I'll just very quickly run through some of the issues that are raised by women and girls in Fiji villages and informal settlements. Include everything from inadequate water sources and the fact that the change, the work to change that is slow and uneven, but there's just an overall lack of washing, bathing water. This leads both to health and illness issues, but also sexual and reproductive health and rights. And what we're finding is that women and girls and small children are impacted the most by these poor water services. And despite the complaints that they're trying to put through women-led groups that we're organizing with, they're really unheard or deprioritized by decision making. We also find there's a real lack of adequate storage and maintenance of water tanks, and that those who are already intersectionally affected by poverty and stigma, they really find it extremely difficult now to secure water supply, about the access to it, but also about the quantity and the quality of water. And we're finding that this is worsening because of the intra-state movement of people in Fiji, but also across climate frontline states here in the Pacific. We also found that in COVID-19, people went back to their villages and to their major, you know, their main households, their wider households. And so that led to some rising water insecurity as well. The village development committees, so that equipment is often failing, and then that makes the water supply intermittent and insecure. The last point I'd raise is that during cyclones and other disasters like floods and tsunamis and the volcanoes eruption that we had in Tonga last year, also that water becomes even more contaminated, and this has health implications for those who don't have any other improved sources of water for daily consumption. And I'd just say that I think there's a lot of people who don't understand that actually in the Pacific, we have the lowest combined rates globally per capita of improved water and basic sanitation. So that means that nearly a third of Pacific people still rely, as you know, on surface water sources for drinking. Thanks.
What is the most important message you would like global water and wash policymakers to hear to carry forward in the water action agenda?
There are two young women from the Diva Networks who will be at the UN Water Conference. And we've been trying to make sure that we're building, helping to build political will. This is a moment when we can do that with the UN World Water Conference. It's another opportunity. More feminists and women human rights defenders than ever are working on basic human rights than ever before, including on water and sanitation, as a result of seeing actually poorer human rights and development results by states, the UN and the development sector, and ourselves as communities in the last 10 to 15 years. The next thing I'd like to say is that we need government highest level and urgent commitments to research and address issues of gender, human rights, water and sanitary ways that are about SRHR, in intersectional ways that look at the differences between women and also in climate justice. We have masses and masses of both evidence and also anecdotal storytelling from our constituencies and communities that tell us that we need to work on gender equality and social inclusion and issues of disability rights and water and sanitation as the highest priority right now, particularly as women from climate frontline states like ourselves are living in times of ecocide, and also that we need to protect ourselves and our water and sanitation and our food sovereignty in these difficult and complex times. Thank you.
Vinaka Valevu Nolene and Tema. The power of Nolene's points about the three pillars Diva embraces is proof that social groups in Fiji are multifaceted. And these groups are voices for the voiceless in our communities, especially for women, girls, and people with disabilities, as highlighted by Nolene in her Yumi Stori. Moving on, we now have the privilege of hearing from Ursula Rakova, who is the director of Tulele Pesa, an organization which focuses on sustainable natural resource management in Bougainville, Papua New Guinea. Ursula will be joined by Lucia Gamara, the Senior Partnerships and Impact Officer at Australian Water Partnership, in the sharing of her story. Let's hear what Ursula has to share with us today.
So greetings all, I'm Juliet and I'm happy to be here together with Yumi Stori.
Sorry, Grace, the video's not playing. Give me 2 seconds.
Not a problem.
Hi Ursula, great to see you again.
Hi, Lucia. It's good to see you. And how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very excited to speak with you. Could you tell us a bit about the work that you do?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lucia. I started to do this work due to my commitment, actually my passion to help my people on Carteret. And this is why I started this relocation program, to get them to a safer and secure place.
Thank you so much, Ursula. And what would you say are the critical water issues in the community where you work?
Okay, the critical water issues here is we have rivers that are running, but the rivers are polluted from upstream, and so they are not clean for drinking. Although there's abundance of rivers here, they are not good for drinking. They are polluted, and also the rivers are dirty because people use them to bath and to do laundry and all that. So there really needs to be improvement in the way we look after our rivers and the way we use it.
Thank you so much for specifying that, Ursula. Are there any other particular issues for women and girls?
Okay, women and girls are hardest hit by lack of clean drinking water because they actually have to collect and fetch water from long distances. And so we want to make women and girls have easy access to getting and fetching water. So okay, women and girls are hardest hit because they have to walk long distances to fetch water or to collect water for drinking, cooking, and laundry. And in this instance, we want to improve the situation by making sure that women and girls, but especially these disabilities as well, elderlies, how can they have easy access to water without having to walk long distances? But water is accessible and they're able to get it whenever they need it, because water is not a luxury. Water is a real need, and this is a real need for women and girls, the elderly, the widows, people with special needs.
That's absolutely right, Ursula, and it must be very hard for them. And it's such an important work that you do. May I ask, how did you become a community leader?
It is my passion for community development work, and I actually get satisfaction when people are happy, when people are doing what they want to do, when people are sustaining themselves. This is what makes me happy, and this is what I want to do for communities, for my own community, for host community, for everyone who is in dire need of pure clean drinking water.
Thank you so much, Ursula. That's really inspiring that you're following your passion and working with your community. Have you faced any challenges as a female leader?
The challenges we face in our community are critical water issues that I see in our target communities that we partner with: a lack of clean drinking water, lack of clean water for laundry and bathing, as animals are also using the same water holes and creeks, and lack of proper sanitation, water health and hygiene. Lack of clean drinking water, fast-flowing rivers within the vicinities of our target communities, but the rivers are being used by other communities in the upper parts of the rivers. The creeks and water holes are not safeguarded, so the animals are also using those. Therefore, this can also be used for laundry and washing. uncleaned water used for ice blocks, mixing drinks to sell in own localities, mostly by women trying to earn some income for their families. Use unclean water to mix cordial and other juices for drinks, then ice these drinks and sell at village side markets. Most children end up with dysentery, stomach problems, but above all, ongoing and long-lasting cough. Women's leadership in the water sector is important due to the following. Women are custodians of the land and can decide on where a health aid post will be located, where a water supply will be established, and or a wash project will be constructed for the benefit and accessibility of the community. Women's leadership in the water sector will include all the special groups such as women, children, widows, people living with disabilities, and the elderly. These are the groups with special needs. Women's leadership in the water sector is important because women are good planners and can plan to respond to the needs they face every day in the community. Women and children are hardest hit with lack of water, hence walk long distances to fetch water from creeks. Therefore, when planning for water, they will ensure that water and sanitation are easily accessible and paramount for all livelihood of the people in the community. The most important messages I would like global water and wash policy makers to hear and carry forward into the water action agenda are: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Instead of throwing plastics into the sea and oceans, reuse by making eco projects such as eco bricks. We must not waste water. We must promote water and sanitation in rural communities, especially communities that are unable to help themselves. We have to help them. This policy has to help everyone in rural communities, especially developing countries.
Thank you, through Ursula and Lucia. I would like to highlight Ursula's fantastic point on water being a necessity and that it should not be treated as a luxury product. She also mentioned that to achieve the SDG targets, we need all partners, water utilities, and other stakeholders to view water as essential to life over the resource being a commodity. How can we move forward in development if the most vulnerable in our communities are still lacking access to basic needs, with water being one of them? Something for us, the audience, to ponder on. Thanks, Ursula, again for passionately sharing your Yumi story with us today. Before I proceed, a kind reminder to everyone, if you have questions that may arise during our Yumi stories, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will be sure to address them during the open forum. And now I take great delight in introducing the following speaker, Dr. Lily Saar, who is an agricultural scientist and director for the Center for Social and Creative Media at the University of Goroka, specializing in farmer learning, including women farmers. Lily will be joined by Professor Juliette Willets, herself a researcher at the Institute for Sustainable Futures from the University of Technology in Sydney.
Greetings all, I'm Juliette and I'm happy to be here together with Lily Saar from the University of Goroka in PNG. And I'm wondering, Lily, if we could start just with a little bit about you, about your research background and how you came to be where you're at now.
Right. I would look at myself as a community development person at this time. My research background is really engaging community using a lot of participatory strategies. And how I got here, well, my career has a mixed bag of skills, starting with education, agriculture, science, communication, and finally now into communication for social change, but agriculture still being the core of it. with the natural resource management, because people are tied to their environment. So looking at it from a holistic perspective, I think is the best option for development interventions.
Great, thanks, and totally agree. And wondering if we could then turn to focus then on water within those environmental and natural resource situation. And wondering if you could tell us a bit about the key challenges around water, either for domestic use or farmers and irrigation in your context.
Right. There's a lot of challenges, but a few that come to mind for our discussion now is the main challenge in communities, rural communities, because that's where I work. A lot of issues to do with power structures in community, to do with ownership of resources, land and water resources. And that also has an implication on women and girls walking or access to water. And it's difficult distances they walk, very long distances, and there are risks associated with that. So the second issue, apart from the power structures, is easy access to water and reduce the time it takes to collect water. And the third issue that I'll be looking at, which is close to my heart, is water security for farming. And not just for farming, but it involves a whole system of families. So it's to do with their livestock, their crops, and the domestic use. And domestic use could also include sanitation and safe drinking water. Water and health issues are all tied to that. So even within a farming family home, you're looking at a whole system of water access affecting family livelihood. So sanitation comes in very, very strong over there. And another issue that I'd like to bring up is that access to water also affects girls' education. So in PNG, a lot of work is done by girl child. And so there's that possibility that excessive amount of time used on water before and after school could cause girls to drop out of school. So the education is affected on that. And the fourth point, because that's a concern to us, equal access to sanitation and health. In communities, I've been to many parts of rural communities in PNG. You're looking at 60 to 70% of people with no sanitation, no proper sanitation. So those are the challenges that I would like to highlight here.
Thank you. Yeah, very huge challenges. And I think then
Yes.
we'd love to hear what do you see as what most needs to change, and what kind of message do you have for global policymakers and the water action agenda about what needs to be done to solve these challenges?
Okay, I'll look at what needs to be done at the rural community level is to develop small systems that is run on their own land, so there are no land disputes. And so water system serves 30 to 40 people, 40 households. So small systems that's manageable by the community themselves. And for policy issues that I would want to bring out would be that we can't achieve sustainable development goal without addressing the root causes of gender inequalities around water and sanitation, and very importantly, the ecosystems that support that water source. So environmental issues come in over here as well. Teaching people to manage the resources around which their water is, apart from managing their little system to meet their own needs.
Great, thank you so much. It's a very clear message that we need to manage the ecosystem as well as the human uses of water.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Lily, for your time.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you to Lily and Juliet. Lily's story really points to the importance of educating communities, both women and men, to manage their ecosystems, to ensure their water resources are protected for generations. All right, last but certainly not the least, we have the great pleasure of hearing from Phil Duncan, who is a proud Gomeroi man and First Nations water leader in Australia. Phil will be joined by Michael Wilson, who is the Group CEO of eWater, in the sharing of his Yumi story.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Wilson. I'm the Chief Executive of eWater Limited, Australia, and I'm sitting today talking to my good friend and mentor, a prominent Indigenous leader in the water sector in Australia, Phil Duncan. Hi Phil.
Yama, Michael. Always a pleasure to be with you, my brother.
So maybe we could start, could you tell me why it's important to you as an Indigenous Australian to support women in the water management and water sanitation and hygiene sector?
Culturally, it's the right thing to do. It's just. I have been and will continue to be a champion for a greater integration of women's voices, knowledge and practices in the water arena. There is a significant piece of knowledge and connection to country, and it's quite unique. So it's not an obligation, it's a commitment, a cultural commitment to continue to support those voices in all discussions around water management planning, and particularly with water infrastructure needs for our communities, the remote and isolated communities in particular.
Can you talk a little bit about, in your experience, what different considerations women and men bring to the table in these discussions about choices on water management?
In my life, and I'm yet to see different in many other nations across this country, wonderful country called Australia, that women bring a unique perspective. They are central to our communities, central to our families. And they have, a cultural responsibility to impart our knowledge, transgeneration to the next generation. So they are our community educators. And more importantly, they understand the needs of community a lot more intricately, particularly around quality water infrastructure that delivers water for life.
And Phil, you've been involved in lots of discussions at the international level amongst different First Nations people about water management issues and sovereignty around decision-making on water. How do you think the Australian experience translates to an international discussion about inclusivity of women in those international discussions and in discussions at the domestic level in their own countries?
Oh, look, I've had the wonderful opportunity to sit with some amazing Indigenous women from around the world in panels, both at CIWI and also COP27. And it provided testimony to me that we as Indigenous people globally, we talk into mirrors with our cultural connections, our spiritual values, and our knowledge. And women's centrality to the keeping of that knowledge and the education of that of our next generations is something that I've seen firsthand. And in Australia, there is a far greater uptake and inclusion of those female voices from a range of Indigenous communities, from the saltwater country to the freshwater to the desert country, and the needs for quality infrastructure. So for me, it's been wonderful to watch the greater inclusion in the decision making, and particularly just the ongoing dialogue. And I'd like to say that I think women bring a far greater caring nature to the debates and the discussions.
So have you noticed a change in women being at the table in these discussions, both domestically and internationally, over the past few years? And if you have, what do you think used to get in the way that we're now beginning to sweep away?
Look, I think I'll start with the latter half of that double question. Lateral violence, bullying, and intimidation, and marginalising the opportunity for women to use their positions as leaders of our family and their knowledge is being dismantled. And, you know, a greater respect for that knowledge and a greater understanding of that in Indigenous society in this country and globally, there is men's and women's business, which is a responsibility, a cultural responsibility that is entrusted in those women and shouldn't be taken lightly, because I have found that they have been very big in game changers in how they educate community to understand water speak and the initiatives, particularly around SDG6 and the need for quality infrastructure. And I've seen that firsthand, how they've built the community's confidence using Indigenous artwork, Indigenous knowledge, and just sitting on country and looking and watching country through the eyes of these women.
So, Phil, how do you think this this cross-cultural discussion between First Nations people on water has enabled discussions to happen where, when it was just government sitting at the table, it wasn't possible?
Oh, that's a great question. I believe that the support of like the Australian Water Partnerships and, you know, e-water and the wide range of other mechanisms that are in this country that act independently of government and therefore have created the opportunity for free thinking and greater inclusion. And that has been a huge success. And we shouldn't underestimate the need for continuing resourcing that process for the greater inclusion of women's voices. I see that, you know, women's yarning circles are just as invaluable as any type of yarning circle that we have in community to work with and for these communities.
Great, Phil. Thanks so much for your time and for giving us the benefit of your enormous experience in this area.
Thank you to Phil and Michael. It is reassuring to see a powerful ally who supports women and their leadership in the water and wash sectors in Australia. And as Phil mentioned in his Yumi Stori, involving women is the just thing to do. It is a cultural commitment. I'll take this time to mention that we are running a bit behind schedule and want the audience to know that we might be running over the scheduled time by 5 to 10 minutes. We hope this is okay with you and that you can join us till the end of this session. Thank you to all our wonderful speakers and interviewers. Through these powerful Yumi stories, we can see the critical connections between water, sanitation, gender equality, Indigenous voices, women's leadership, and climate resilience in our communities. These wonderful Yumi stories only scratched the surface of this important topic. To help continue these discussions, our interviewers have provided further insights through video snippets. This will be shared with participants following the event. All right, now we'll move on to the open forum discussion, and it is your turn to ask some questions to our panelists and interviewers. As previously flagged, some speakers will not be able to join us for the open forum, but we are pleased to be joined by those who could make it. At this point, I kindly ask if our available speakers could turn on their cameras and get ready for the discussion. A note for the audience to change your Zoom view from speaker to gallery mode for this part of the session so that you can see our interviewers and speakers clearly. Great. Okay, on the screen, I'm pleased to be joined live by Lily Saar, Navara Kiene, Juliet Williams, Lucia Gamara, Tema Wickham, and Sarah Ransom, as well as Phil. We're sorry to be missing Cassie Sawang and Ursula Rakova from the discussion, and they send their apologies due to conflicting schedules and connectivity issues. And Michael Wilson was unable to join us live, so we welcome Sarah Ransom, as I've mentioned previously, who is the General Manager for Australian Water Partnership in his place. I'll now ask my colleague Mia if we have any questions from the audience to share with our panelists today.
Thanks, Grace. We do have a great question from Paul Glennie, where he's asked, we've heard about the need to empower women more at both the local level, bottom up, and the decision-making at a higher level, top down. Regarding making the shift at the higher decision-making level, what are the best ways to increase women's representation and influence at this decision-making level in water resources management?
Great question. Thanks, Mia. I might maybe have someone speak from the ground roots level, and then we'll pass it on to maybe Sarah Ransom or Juliet Willett, who can share their perspectives on that. But I'll pass on this question to Dr. Lily Saar. If you could share some thoughts on this, and then the others can pitch in if they'd like to. Dr. Lily Saar, I hope you can see us and hear me.
Yes, Grace. Hi there. Hi, everyone. Yes, I can.
Awesome.
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Maybe Mia, could you please repeat the question for Dr. Lily Saar, and then we'll go on from there.
Sure, Lily. It's a question about hearing about the need to empower women more at both the local level and the decision-making in the higher level, top down. So we were going to ask you about empowering women at the local level, and then pass to Sarah from AWP to talk about decision-making at the higher level in water resource management.
Yeah, working with communities, and I think I'll just make a point about the communication tools that we use in community in sharing success stories that work, and even challenges and how best to address those. And for me at the community level, it's looking at a holistic perspective. You're looking at the needs that women and girls, people living with disabilities, and generally the households have in addressing water issues. And I like to work across addressing their issues, but at the same time looking at the ecosystems around the water resources. So at the community level, addressing those two things together so that there is sustainable water access for people, I think is important, and to use the communication channels that we have to share those stories with policymakers at the national level, and even to the international level. So I find that the tool communication that we use on the ground, and at the same time sharing those stories at the higher level so policymakers can see what is happening and how the SDG6 and other SDGs are being met in community. So we're looking at 2030 to be able to achieve this. I wonder if we can achieve all those SDGs that we have, especially when at the community level, I still see lots in Papua New Guinea, it's about 60 to 70% still not having proper sanitation. So how do these get addressed by governments, national governments, and probably even at the international policy making level. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Dr. Lilisa, for sharing your thoughts on the importance of using communication tools to share and address SDG6 issues in our communities. Sarah, do you have thoughts on this question as well?
Yeah, I really agree with what Lily just said from the community level. So it links into a point that Phil made in his presentation as well, which is around, I think he used the term water speak. So for me, a lot of the questions around inclusion are around how we speak about water and the way that we communicate information. So Lily, you made that point really strongly at the community level. I think it's also relevant in decision-making and in management of water, all the way up the decision-making chain. Technical language is necessary in the water space. There's a lot of technical stuff that creates the environments and creates the systems that manage our water safely and sustainably. But we really, as a sector, need to learn to communicate better. This technical language can be really exclusionary, and that can impact, like so many things that we've heard today, more heavily on women and girls, and it's just not fair. And it means that you do have statistics like limited access to water, you know, chronic problems with water quality that women keep reporting, but it's just not heard by the people who make the decisions and decide what's important. I just make one more point as well. I think with women in decision making, there are women leaders out there, and we've got a number of them on this webinar today. It's really great to see them. These women leaders are out there, but women who are in leadership positions need to support other women, so support younger women. That means mentoring, so taking the time and putting the energy into developing younger women and helping their voices to be heard. But it also means getting out of the way sometimes, and also for our male colleagues, I think they need to do the same thing in supporting women. Sometimes is you know, things like stepping down, refusing to speak on panels that are all men are really important symbols, and really very strong sense of solidarity comes from those kind of actions. Thanks, Grace.
Thanks, Sarah, for sharing your insights. And I understand, Juliet, you've also done a great amount of work in this space as well. I know we're pressed for time, but I'd love if you can share your thoughts as well via the Zoom chat, so that others can also see the work that you're doing in Australia and the Pacific region. I'll quickly move on to a question for Navara and Tema before having a closing question for Phil. Tema and Navara, from your perspective, what role does and should a WASH civil society organization, or CSO, play in accelerating change towards greater gender equality and improved WASH access? I'd like if you can succinctly address this question for our audience. Maybe we'll start with Tema and then move on to Navara.
Thank you, Grace, for this question. So coming from a CSO, in my perspective, we work in communities in Solomon Islands, yeah? And we bring in our own approaches or tools on ways of working with the community. I think it's always important that we see communities not only as beneficiaries, but as partners as well. So the way that we work with communities at the community level is how do we strengthen, our partnership, the collaboration, working with people in the community is very important and critical, that we build relationships that will have lasting, outcomes for the community. So when I I mentioned, like when we bring our own approaches or way of working in the communities, it's very important to ensure that when we engage women or young girls, youth, men in the workshops, we ensure that women is represented. And we also ensure that, their responses after those workshops are directed to the correct or the right organizations, the right sectors, or even brought up to the government level, so that we are not only just, gathering information, but we are also ensuring that actions or the priorities of communities are also brought up, and we can see, tangible outcome of that. So in my perspective, that's what I see way of working and strengthening the collaboration should lead to. Thank you, Grace.
Excellent, thanks, Tema. Navarra, any thoughts to add?
Yeah, thanks, Grace and Tema. And I think Tema's mentioned most of probably what I was going to say as well. I mean, in terms of CSOs, we have that closer kind of working relationship and programs with the community level to have those in conversations and work closely with the community level. But just to add to that, is also working with the other local groups as well to work with the communities, like for instance, women's groups. I think they, from our experience with WaterAid, working closely with the local women's groups and even the local DPOs have also that close kind of relationship and can start those conversations and work closely with the women at community level to kind of support them. I think with CSOs, I mean, speaking from my case, we're working with an international NGO, we're kind of removed, and our support is as far as the program goes or the grants. So it's working also, apart from directly, it's working with those local existing groups to support the communities and have those conversations and support them to build that women's support women in leadership at the community level. Yeah.
I've unmuted myself. Thanks, Navarra and Tema again. It's great to hear that the word sustainability through your thoughts as well. One of it being creating generational value, as you mentioned, Tema, is one way to keep projects sustainable in our communities. All right, so the last question, we're very close to time, but Phil Duncan, I'd really love to ask you this question. You mentioned during your Yumi Stori that including women in water conversations is not an obligation, but a cultural commitment. Can you share with us ways this is achieved at the community level in Australia during regional or national negotiations? Thanks, Phil.
Maribor, Grace, thank you. First and foremost, I want to start with, I am my mother's son and my father's man. I'm the oldest of 127 grandkids, and and the father of 4 daughters. So I believe it's significantly important that I demonstrate the inclusivity of women's voices in everything that I do, and to walk with and for women. I also want to say it's an honour and privilege to be here today with these magnificent women to share the stage with you. I believe that, that the opportunity is to repatriate women's knowledge and have it interwoven into water dialogue and provide every opportunity to look at strategies and policies and particularly on-country projects that can make a difference. And I believe that we are seeing a greater uptake of that. But for me, it's still not good enough. And for a lot of people in Australia, it's still not good enough. We're not where we should be. It's not where we want to be. We want to be everywhere, but it's where we should be. And it's the language we need to use. Changing our language. We should never, ever talk for. It's with. Not talk to, but listen. And I think that if we can change the whole
language that we use and create the safe environments where we can have our women have the courageous conversations. That is important for me. That is something that we do very well in the arenas that I get to work with, particularly with AWP and the works that I get to do with in that environment. So the key message is let's rematriate the knowledge of our women into everything that we do. It shouldn't be a separate thing. And I think that we will be pleasantly surprised as to the outcomes and the quality of life, longevity of life through a quality infrastructure that the women can be leaders in. And I say,
Excellent. Thank you, Phil. I really loved that statement you made. We don't work not doing work for, but with people. So collaboration is key to moving the SDG6 agenda forward in our communities. Thanks for that. Very inspiring. I know that people have been putting great questions in the chat, and unfortunately we don't have time to answer all of them, but we will have a follow-up where we'll provide answers to those questions. I just want to ask, Mia, do we still have time for the call to action and Mentimeter?
Yep, go ahead, Grace.
Yep.
Just 5 more minutes if everyone can bear with us. It'll be worth it.
Awesome. All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, panelists, again. This session has given us all some serious food for thought, and now it is time for all of us to put those thoughts into action. So we're going to do that through a Mentimeter question. So please refer to the link in the chat or go to www.menti.com and enter the code that you see on the screen so that you can input your responses. And the question is, what will you do to support women's leadership in water and WASH? Please feel free to type in more than one response and we'll give you a minute to think about this and answer your questions. Thanks, everyone. I also know that there is also a bit of a lag when running Mentimeter on Zoom or MS Teams, but I can see a few answers coming in. 3 answers so far. Wow, the first one, listen. Listen, yes, listening actively and with purpose and intention. Great, yes, please keep your responses coming in. There's some great ideas here. Develop frameworks that include, rather than ignore gendered and social elements of water management and water security to help make these more visible. Great. Identify and support water and WASH champions. Mentor young women. Great, that ties in with education at the top. I'll let our team scroll down to see a few more responses. Yes, what Phil has mentioned, implement the rematriation of women's knowledge, have it interwoven in our decision-making processes instead of a silo or standalone. Great. Awesome. Well, I'll allow you to continue to put your ideas. Let's take these important actions on board to really shift the needle so that women's leadership and diversity in water and WASH decision-making can really become a norm, a new norm in our society in order to achieve SDG6. Great, thanks team. Thank you again to all the Yumi Stori speakers and interviewers for sharing their important stories and messages. I will now just quickly mention about the transformative WASH for Climate Resilience Toolkit that was developed by the Water for Women team. It provides a range of Water for Women and partner knowledge and learning products and tools for water and WASH practitioners. And Mia has put this link in the chat for you to access anytime after this session. I will now hand it over to Navara for the closing remarks. Thanks, Navara.
Thanks, Grace. So firstly, just well done to all the panelists. It was great to have, such a wide range of, governments, representation from government, CSO, CBO, rights groups, researchers, academics, across the panelists, who are all, I guess, leaders in their own right in accelerating the change, accelerating WASH access across the globe. I think, they all spoke at different levels, but it was clear that there was some kind of themes coming across, common themes that came across all their presentations and all their interviews. So I'll just try and sum up in like a few quick points of what those kind of common themes that came out of these sessions. I think one of them was, firstly, I think at the policy level, the research, the importance of research, government partnerships with CSOs, CBOs, local groups to get that data, and also to, I think Lily mentioned about looking at the power structures and how we can address them, especially the gender power structures between men and women. Kessie, my counterpart from PNG, spoke about institutionalization of WASH at that level to increase government's focus on WASH at policy level, but she also spoke on herself as a local PNG leader, why women's voices are so important in decision making, and for her, it was driven by that lived experience, which I'm sure the other speakers also spoke about, lived experience and how important it is hearing that from women and girls from the communities, and then as Kessie demonstrated, then bringing it forward at different levels. And then we had, I think it was Nolene spoke about research as well. So she also added on to other researchers and talking about how more research should be a priority across all the Pacific Island nation. And again, she talked about the top-down government support for that. Ursula had a really great point about water not being a luxury, but a necessity. So it talks about that, the access. So it's not access to just a certain group or luxury. It's should be accessible by all. And she mentioned those more, especially the more vulnerable groups like women, young girls, people with disabilities, who, although they are the most, they're central to WASH in any community, they're the most vulnerable to the consequences of the absence of clean drinking water in rural communities. So that again came out about how central women and girls are to WASH access. The next speaker, again, Lily, Dr. Lisa spoke about, again, the focus on research. And I think she, with Ursula had that focus on water resource management from a kind of ecological perspective about, the livelihoods of women and girls and communities around the, waterways. And I think Lily gave another interesting perspective on water resource management from a kind of conflict rights, land rights perspective. So I think, that theme of water resource management also came through from a different perspective from Dr. Sa. And then we had my colleague Phil talk about, again, the rich knowledge of Indigenous women. That's another theme that came through our speakers, and why there was, again, are so important, but also around infrastructure. So they can contribute to infrastructure, water quality, and the other things that other external parties are doing in the community. So I think, again, that theme of the importance of women's voices in the initiatives that we take on, and also women as educated. We can really lean on the local knowledge that local women have from the communities. Yeah, and yes, so I think those are some of the key themes that came out of the great sessions that we've had this morning. I think for the members who are present at I think this is a great segue, not just for because today is World Water Day, but also as we move into those who are attending the UN conference as well. I think we'll take a lot of those points will be a lot of the key drivers that we'll be also emphasizing in the various activities that will be taking part in the conference. So I think, there's some great learnings from this session, and we'd all like to take it forward in the different various ways. And there's already, I think, from that Menti survey, looks like there's a lot of really great ideas of how people will be taking forward. I saw some really great comments done, and it's well done too. I think it's encouraging to see, even though it's a short, we had a short event. It's encouraging to see the different ways that people are taking the discussions forward from this. So yeah, thank you everyone, and happy World Water Day.
Thank you, Navarra. I'll just quickly wrap it up. I know we're way over schedule time, but that's just a good point that was shared. When we have a Yumi Stori or Talanoa session, usually we can be discussing for more than 1 or 2 hours. So that's it's a good example, our webinar today. Thank you, Navarra, for closing. We wish everyone a World Water Day, a very happy World Water Day, and all the best for delegates attending the UN Water Action in New York. Thanks, everyone.